These heavily armed fighters posed for reporters at an undisclosed location in northern Ukraine, close to the border with Russia, on Wednesday. They claimed to be members of a paramilitary group made up of Russians opposed to their country's invasion of Ukraine, who earlier this week launched a brazen two-day incursion and raid on the Russian city of Belgorod.
Наші дальніші плани.
Denis Kapustin, a Russian national who claims to command what he calls the Russian Volunteer Corps, boasted to the press that more cross-border raids were in the works, saying, quote, "Just a couple of days to see us again on that side." Yesterday, his group released this video showing fighters on an armored vehicle driving past a border crossing. This footage obtained by Reuters shows a fighter place an RVC sticker on a Russian personnel carrier. Russia has said the attackers, which it called terrorists, had been, quote, crushed. Russian media aired images of what it said were the invaders' vehicles, claiming they were American-made. Russia's defense ministry said 70 invaders were killed and the rest driven back to Ukraine. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu promised on Wednesday that Moscow would respond to any more cross-border raids by Ukrainian militants swiftly and, quote, extremely harshly. Ukraine's government denied any role in the raid. Asked what kind of support he got from Kyiv, Kapustin said,
Medicine, petrol, obviously a lot of encouragement.
He said 2 members of his group had been killed and 10 wounded, then pointed to what he called the main trophy, a Russian military vehicle he said his fighters captured. While the 2-day operation might have done little to damage the Russian military, analysts said the incursion could force Moscow to reallocate forces ahead of an expected Ukrainian counteroffensive.
First of all, it shows that the Russian border is undefended, and if this, of course, will cause Russia to divert troops away from the defensive lines elsewhere in Ukraine to try to reinforce that border, to try to prevent anything like this happening again.
Keir Giles is with the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House. He said the assault also had a psychological element.
It's part of a pattern of events that show that Russia is not invincible, and the Ukraine can, in fact, deliver damage to Russia itself. If we think back to, for example, the drone attacks on the Kremlin, exploding small explosive devices on top of one of the iconic buildings for Russian statehood. All of it undermines this narrative that the war will not touch Russia itself.
Russia has blamed Ukraine for attacks inside Russia or Russian-held territory in recent months, many of them on fuel depots in Russian-occupied Crimea, which Moscow calls sabotage. On Wednesday, Moscow claimed to have foiled an attack on one of its warships by 3 uncrewed Ukrainian speedboats in the Black Sea. This week's operation in Belgorod would be Ukraine's largest such incursion known so far.
Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.
And there they go. It looks like
The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1. The Kohinoor and the Colonial Loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.